Hello and welcome to the Delphian Podcast.
Delphian is an artist-led nomadic gallery focusing on emerging and early career artists.
Each episode will feature a different art world practitioner, from artists and gallerists to collectors and curators.
If you like today's episode, please like, share and subscribe.
Hello and welcome to the Delphian Podcast. My name is Nick J.S. Thompson and with me as ever is Benjamin Murphy.
With us today is Aindrea Emelife, who is a critic, curator, art advisor and presenter from London. She has presented shows for prestigious institutions like the Royal Academy, the Hepworth and the Courtauld Gallery. And as well as this, she writes for the Financial Times, the Guardian and the BBC, amongst others. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.
So how did you begin working in all the varying areas that you have today? This is so wide-ranging, isn't it?
Yeah, I've sort of never really thought I'd be someone that could really pin myself down to one career path. I mean, I guess the path is always going to be art, but I always am thinking of different projects and I want to wear different hats. So I started fundamentally as a writer when I was at the Courtauld Institute of Art where I studied, and I was just quite precocious and started emailing people with ideas for articles. And luckily they thought I was a good writer, which is good. It's a good place to start as a writer. And I just started on with that, and I think moving on to curating is quite natural because I see curation as sort of like a visual essay, or at least the way I curate. And all the other things just come from learning and sort of being in the art world. So I founded a residency, and that comes from, being around artists and understanding what they need and how we can improve like life for artists, which is fundamental if you want to work in art. And everything else just kind of folded in together, and I hope it continues to. There's plenty more things I want to try my hat at.
Like what?
Writing a book, which you guys have already done. So, yeah.
So what would your book be about?
Maybe about how to sort of carve a path in the art world as a woman. I mean, it's a topic that people ask me a lot about. I guess now it's a bit different. There's always going to be need for pursuing change and developing things. But I mean, most of my favorite art gallerists are women. There's more and more curators and directors that are women. But definitely when I was studying, which wasn't even that long ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, there were less role models. So I think that would be a fun topic. Otherwise, I don't know, I might go back to my art history roots and sort of just find a new theory and sort of focus on that. There's so much to touch upon. It's exciting.
That sounds like an interesting book. We should have got you to write a guest article for our book.
You should have.
It's too late now.
Hindsight is a beautiful thing.
You should definitely write that though.
Yeah.
Really interesting. We'll put you in contact with our publisher.
Exactly. Publishers listen. Yeah.
So how do all of these multifarious processes, say curation, writing, advising, presenting, how do they all inform each other and how they're connected?
So writing, definitely. I think writing is sort of at the core of what I do just because, it's the first way for me to process my ideas. So whenever I start thinking about shows and stuff, I really start with essays and formulating sort of little writings, whether it's in notebooks or an actual published thing. That's usually where my ideas start from. Then, to curating, it comes quite naturally. I never studied curation. It wasn't part of my course. I studied art history, and they didn't have any of like sort of business or curation or art market stuff as part of the course. So I really just tried my hat at it and found out that, I was pretty good at it. I had a good eye. So those two are intrinsically linked for me. Presenting, so I've done some short videos for galleries and museums. That I find is again a sort of spidering out from writing, and I guess it's just sort of making it spoken. I was really passionate about making art and sort of thinking about the theories of art a bit more accessible, and I find doing video work is much easier because my writing style is perhaps more academic, but my presenting style is far more colloquial and conversational, but they do sort of they do address the same themes. So I find the sort of video stuff quite rewarding. And I guess it's also great because with the video stuff, you can put a face to the ideas. And, I'm a young Black woman working in art, and that in itself is quite an interesting sort of accessibility point for people from various backgrounds, sort of to understand art. I guess there's sometimes a bit of a disconnect with the sort of traditional sort of old white Oxford guys, which is actually changing a lot in sort of traditional arts TV and arts media. But yeah, so that is another sort of aspect. I think most of it is just looking at art and trying to make it accessible and trying to make people feel and realize that art is kind of addressing the same themes. Like we've all sort of experienced, love and loss, and we'll experience death, and no matter the context of life, all the art that's being made sort of addresses the same sort of human experience. Yeah,
Cool.
sorry, tangent.
No, good.
So you run Plop Residency with Oli Epp.
Yes, it's so fun.
How did you get involved with that? How did you meet Oli?
So I met Oli in a really lovely way. So he was doing his solo show in Paris at Semio's Gallery last year. And he did his opening. I didn't go to the opening, but I found myself in Paris a couple of weeks after, and he'd gone back, I think for fun mostly. And I sort of saw him in Paris. Well, I saw him on Instagram. It's almost the same thing these days. And I'd sent him a DM and I said, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? And we really hit it off and became very good friends. The thing with Oli, he's very ambitious and very giving and very humble. So he really loves the idea of giving back. He's been extremely successful, and one of the great things I think of him is that he loves to give back. He was already running a residency in a more informal way. Sort of, he would buy studios for artists. He did an open call type of thing, and we thought it'd be nice to give it a bit more structure, and so Plop was born. I introduced him to some collectors that I'd been advising on their collection, and they were thrilled with the idea of giving something back and having a philanthropic effort to help alleviate the lack of studio spaces in London, and also help international artists come to London for a month, which is, it's pretty difficult, I think, and they can have a space to work and a space to develop their contacts. So yeah, we've been running for maybe, I think it's 9 months now, and we have every interest to keep it going. It's been really rewarding, sort of 5 artists every month, different countries. We've had Chile, Egypt, Pakistan. We've had all over the Americas, and obviously more neighbouring countries like France and Germany. Yeah, it's been lovely. It's really nice to meet all these different artists and see how they respond to each other. Yeah.
It's really nice. I think it's a very altruistic thing to do, because it was self-funded by Oli originally, wasn't it? It's kind of nice to see like an artist who has early on success in his career, initiating this kind of thing with you and with these people you've brought on board, because a residency essentially doesn't really, or I can't imagine it making you guys money, right?
It's completely non-for-profit. Yeah. We don't take anything from it. It's free to enter, which is another sort of unique thing, I guess. A lot of residencies aren't, even though if it's a small fee. And they get tutorials also. They get tutorials with Rosalind Davis, who you've had on your podcast before.
Yeah, episode 2, I think.
Yeah, and also Danny Lamb, who's from Painters Painting Paintings, which I love that account so much.
Rod Barton, right?
Yes, Rod Barton, and soon to be featured. I think he's doing his own project coming up next year. So they get that sort of support as well, and. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting seeing artists from other countries sort of been plopped into London and how they respond and how they can really throw themselves into it and meet people. I think it's quite unique, and it's beneficial for the London-based artists as well, but I think it's especially interesting to see, people from other countries and backgrounds and how they respond to being here. Some of them haven't even left their countries before, which was very humbling. To see that they come here for this and they never step foot outside their country. There's so many artists in the world, though. It really did open my eyes. Like, of course I know there's so many, but gosh, being an artist is difficult. There's so many of you guys. But I appreciate their, stamina and vitality and keeping it going.
So where's the name from?
Oh, Oli.
It's very Oli.
It's very Oli. That's most people realize I didn't come up with the name. Plop came from Oli. We were just sort of throwing around names. Plop is sort of, well, the idea of plop is that it's like sort of being dropped in the ocean or plopped into the ocean. So it's like, coming to London, making a splash, and another pun there, making a splash, and then, and exploring London. But also, it's a kind of a pun on pop, I guess. Oli's practice is, he likes to call it post-digital pop. And I think it's, what did he say? I think it's the highest scoring Scrabble combination for Oli Epp. I haven't tried this. I can't confirm it. I'm not a Scrabble person. Oli does try to wangle me into these things, but no. Apparently this is the case. I think someone else pointed this out. It was a very lovely coincidence. But it's also, I guess, to alleviate the idea of these... most residencies are sort of like the something trust, and it's all very aloof, and I guess, I don't know, we want it to be really fun and less less intimidating to enter. It's a fun thing. It's also a very social residency. We're around taking people out for fun things like pizza nights and introducing them to our friends. So yeah, it's a funny name, but I think it works.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever made artwork yourself?
No, I haven't. I was just pondering sort of getting into drawing, but I have never really had a good hand at these things, which is, I guess it's kind of surprising because, I mean, I've already got so many slashes in my sort of, in my job title, but I've never tried. I guess I see writing as like an art form in itself, but no, I've not tried really that much, but who knows, maybe I'll explore. I'll be a sort of a late bloomer and start taking over that way, but I really do love writing and sort of the other bits and processing art from an exterior point of view. I think it informs something in me. I think I think this is my bag for now.
That's interesting to mention. Have you read The Critic as Artist by Oscar Wilde?
No.
It's
sounds like something to add to my ever-growing Amazon list. My Amazon's like, please no, stop.
I think it's old enough now that you can download it for free.
Okay.
But, so you don't need to pay Jeff Bezos any money.
Oh, damn it. I'm sure he needs the coins.
It's his approach is very much that criticism of artwork, critique, is a creative act in itself, and it adds something to the artwork that wasn't necessarily present beforehand.
Well, I like that idea. I very much subscribe to that. I should give this book a read. I like the idea of like sort of exterior influence, sort of adding more to the work. But I guess it's been discussed in a bit. I mean, the role of a critic is kind of, it's definitely going through a flux at the moment, in that I really do think a lot of the critics in popular newspapers aren't that critical. It's a lot of fluffy pieces about... I mean, there's some great criticism out there, but a lot of the main newspapers, there are a few that I just find not so critical, and mostly just like regurgitated press releases. No names being mentioned, but I'm sure people can guess. But so the role of critic, I guess, isn't as powerful as it was before, but I would love it to become a bit more so, and I think there's ways for it to become a bit more modern, and for it to still inform a practice without being sort of bullish and commandeering, which I think at some point it did become very like, oh, what I say goes, and if I say it's good, it's not. I think criticism doesn't have to be the be all and end all. I think it's good to sort of activate a good discussion. So some humility in criticism is interesting, I guess, but I can see how it's very easy for an ego to get involved when you're a high-flying critic. Hey, maybe I'll be like that in a few years. Maybe I'm still very much naive and enthusiastic, but
So you said just then that the role of the critic is kind of in flux.
Yeah.
Do you think that's also the case for the role of the curator and the gallerist now that there's things like social media?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the rise in sort of self-put-on shows is definitely a thing. I can't speak so much of New York or anywhere else, but I've got so many friends who just put on exhibitions, which I think is fabulous. I think there was always I think before there was a bit more of the idea of like, I have to be a curator, I have to study curation and go through all these steps. But, you know, there's artists that are curating, there's people that, like artists who are writing, there are people that haven't studied that are still, you know, maintaining that their opinion is apt and it's valid and they're putting that across. And I mean, that's how I started with curation. I didn't study it. I just sort of had an idea and I found a space. I was very lucky to find a great space that my friend had. It was a studio space and I just put on a show. I think there's a lot of a self-initiation and sort of making it happen. And by doing that, that's making the roles, or the traditional roles and how it was seen, a bit more fluid, in that you can kind of sort of have dabble in many different things. Social media has also made that a thing because, I mean, social media allows people to have a voice that people previously didn't have. There's things like Medium where people are posting their own articles and people are, you know, having blogs. There's like the White Pube and everything else. I think, yeah, social media has definitely opened things up a lot more, and I think that's great. And I don't know, I think maybe the traditional media is a bit shook.
Yeah.
And they should be, because, I don't know, the youngsters are coming for them, which is amazing.
Do you think that rise in social media has affected the traditional role of a gallery as well? That, like, the sort of the existing gallery model?
Yeah, I mean, I know more and more artists that are choosing not to have a sort of fixed relationship with galleries. Like, so they'll have a sort of more fluid representation, which I don't know how they quantify, but I guess having close relationships without actual contracts controlling what they do in terms of shows and interviews and everything else. Galleries are also shutting a lot. I don't know. I mean, that's, I guess, more of a reflection of political market and economic markets and things like that. But the role of the gallery is definitely, I mean, there's so many more nomadic platforms. My sort of spaces move a lot. And I think the idea of like being able to move and create different happenings and different engagements between cities has changed the whole gallery system, because they're obviously, all galleries are mostly thought to be in fixed spaces. Yeah. And then the art fair model is, I mean, all of this is mostly from an emerging art point of view. I think the gallery system is very much still there when you get to secondary and sort of more established markets, mostly because of economic stability, but also because these type of relationships become more informative and more needed at that stage. But I think the idea of being a bit more flexible and having fluidity in the beginning of your career is, I guess, it makes more sense. So I think, yeah, there's a lot happening with emerging or whatever that means, emerging galleries, and how that's changing. You guys, you have your space, and that's...
We don't have a permanent space.
No,
you don't have a permanent space? I thought it was permanent in the print...
No, so we're nomadic as well. So yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, it's the way to go. I mean, rents are extortionate. That's definitely part of it.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in London.
It seems like it's easier now for artists and early career artists and curators to make their own opportunities.
Yeah.
But yet that almost seems kind of counterintuitive because of how insanely hiked up studio rents are, exhibition space rents are and stuff. So how do you think that artists are doing that, and how can artists do that kind of thing?
I guess there's a sort of trade-off in that. I mean, most spaces that shows are put on aren't in the middle of Mayfair and things like that. I guess people are becoming a bit more fluid in the spaces they show. So I've been to great exhibitions in warehouses, in studio spaces that are sort of given a bit of a veneer and sort of transformed into the more of the traditional white cube sort of gallery space. I guess sort of having a bit more fluidity in what you consider to be a show, and accepting that great ideas can be born from a model and from a sort of a space that isn't the traditional sort of, what you imagine to be an institutional show. Some of the better shows I've been to have been more grassroots type things. And I think the sort of popularity of that is one of the sort of main buzzy things about London. I'm sure this stuff well, I'm not sure. I feel like places like New York that wouldn't work as well. I mean, most of the studio spaces are in like Brooklyn, and I guess where I think London is lucky in that there are so many different districts that you can engage with, and I think there's still a sort of a space for funding that would be great in terms of like funding, ideas and curatorial projects. There's definitely a lack of that in sort of encouraging exhibitions to happen. I think the focus is on studio spaces, which I think is valid completely, because there's no exhibitions that without the artwork. But one thing I'd love to see is like an initiative that would support exhibitions and fostering ideas and creating discussions. The Arts Council does do a good job. They only have so much money though, I guess. That's the next step, I think. That'd be great. Don't know if it's going to happen though.
Yeah. Do you think it's easier now for young artists and curators as well to make their own opportunities rather than having to wait around to be picked up by
It is easier,
gallery?
but it's also daunting. So I go back to my alma mater, Courtauld Institute, and I do lecture there sometimes on these type of things, and I do constantly still get the feedback that they feel disconnected and scared to do these things. I think the sort of, I hate the word millennial, but like the millennial sensibility of just getting up and doing your own thing is definitely, that's more of a thing than it was decades ago. I think we're very much more okay with the idea of breaking away from the traditional sort of hierarchy and stepping up and paying your dues and doing intern and going up and just going and doing it. I think that's something that's very much in the spirit of people of this generation, which helps. But I still think there's a little bit of a not scaredness, but a cautiousness about doing it. But the more and more that people do it, the more it becomes a bit less scary. I'm seeing so many people do it though, and I think it's amazing. So many of my friends put on shows, and so many of my friends that are artists have been very proactive in getting their name, getting their art and their name through the door, and showing up to events and networking fiercely, and curating a very good and very strong Instagram. But yeah, and there's also some great artists that just don't know how to do these things, and probably their personality isn't suited to being a social media maven, and that's also, I guess, a difficulty, because there's some amazing artists that just aren't suited to that, and does that mean we're never going to discover them?
What do you think they could do to sort of overcome that? What would be another route for them to gain notoriety?
I don't know. That's really difficult. I don't know what you can do. I mean, there's some of my favorite artists are just very quiet, reserved people, and I mean, for example, Oli, he's an amazing artist, but he's also great at sort of putting himself out there. He's got the most amazingly curated Instagram, and he spends a lot of time thinking about his moves and how he works, and I wish more artists could be like that, but for some people it's not in them, and that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It's just some people aren't as outgoing. I guess when a sort of an opportunity like social media arises, it's great because it allows people to rise to the top, but it means there's also some great people that don't, because they don't have those tools. Maybe, I don't know much about art school programs. I think some are starting to cotton on to that type of thing, like in terms of branding and social media, like curation, and how to, effectively display their work and things like that. I guess it could come from art schools, it should come from art schools. Whether it does or not is to be seen.
It's tricky because I'm a lecturer at a university, and it's kind of impossible to mark any of that kind of stuff. Professional practice stuff.
How do you mark about? You're great at this stuff. You're not.
But it's also learning that is to be implemented kind of post art school. So it's hard to fit it into the curriculum for a brief and then mark it. So you
can't really mark it.
Sadly, it kind of
it falls on them a bit.
But it would be really useful because
it
artists come out of university and they're just not equipped for the art world.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, I've got great work, but
I know the history.
Hello, like sort of like
history
echo
and the
chamber.
theory,
Hello.
yeah. So that's kind of why we do the podcast, why we're writing the books, why we do these panel discussions.
Yeah, those things. I mean, you know, those books and panel discussions, they're great. I hope artists buy them and read them and go to them. That's another step. Get it in front of them. But I mean, things are improving immensely. And at the end of the day, the social media and you know, awareness of like how to portray yourself as professionally as an artist the quality is still very high. It's just, you know, there's always room for improvement.
So as a writer and a curator and all of that, so this is a question that we ask a lot of people, but it's very good to get as many different ideas and opinions on it as possible. How best can early career artists make themselves and their works discoverable to people like you?
Yeah. How do you make yourself discoverable? Well, I mean, the first thing, I guess, is emailing your work, although that in itself is problematic because I won't lie, I do sometimes get a lot of submissions and I can't look at them all. I guess standing out in some way. I think the more effective discussions I've had is when people have come up to me at events. I'm always really impressed if an artist is around and they'll just come up and be like, hi, and introduce themselves. Not sort of, you know, whip out their phone and show me their work. As soon as they're like, hi, I just want to see my work. They mostly sort of have a discussion and then maybe send me a DM after. I guess having the double sort of introduction is nice rather than getting a solo, like a strange email, like, this is my work. But in general, putting yourself out there and being discovered, it's quite an organic thing, I think. Instagram is one of the main methods I use to discover artwork. And then second to that, I guess it's more sort of in person. Yeah, those two things, I guess, are the only two things I can think of that are like practically important. Being a good social networker and being bolshy enough to create these opportunities of meeting people in themselves. Although it's really hard to do that. So I guess it's difficult. I find it a difficult thing to ask of artists. Yeah. But
it's also quite problematic as well if you don't live in an art world hub. You don't live in London or New York or LA. Like if you live in the countryside somewhere.
And I often find myself like beating myself up for not going to the regional degree shows as well. And there's so many artists. That's the main thing. What do you guys think? I feel like I should have a better answer to that. Yeah.
Well, a kind of secondary question to that, responding to something you just said, is that you see most of the artwork you encounter now through Instagram. I think there's a very definite, tangible trend for artwork performing well in galleries that also has previously performed well on things like Instagram. Yeah. And not all artwork does look great on things like Instagram.
Oh, 100%.
So do you think that is problematic?
That is difficult. I really feel for artists that their work isn't just not... Like, fundamentally, it's just like, it just doesn't translate well. My work looks shit on Instagram. Yeah. I mean, I've not seen your work yet. I'm sure it looks great. But I've seen art in real life and then seen it on Instagram. And it's just, I mean, whether it's the pigments, like a very dark black piece with nuances of blue, don't know how you photograph that. I mean, this guy's tried. It's difficult. That in itself is difficult. To alleviate that, I guess some people use video, or you just have to get them down. It's fundamentally hard because it then will it might skew artists to make work that is Instagrammable or like more towards that thing, and I don't know if that's necessarily correct, because on the other side, there's some work that I think works better on Instagram than it works in real life. I mean, I guess especially with the rise of art, sort of painting that looks digital, when it's digitalized, like on an iPhone, it might look, it's easier to consume, like a digital looking painting on a digital device, and then on the wall would look different. translating things is always going to be a difficulty. I don't know how you change that. That's something for, I guess, technology to change and to alleviate. I mean, in the end of the day, these things, the introduction of these things have been monumental. I don't know how people could scroll through art really, especially new art, like before Instagram. I spend most of my time just like looking through my feed, and it's great because I can count it as work when you get when you get the pop up like you spent 2 hours on Instagram. I'm like, oh no, it's work, I promise. But I spend so much time sort of and I get into this sort of black hole of like, oh, and I see someone comment on a work and I'm like click and I'm like, oh, this is great, and then suddenly I'm on someone's website, and then I'm at someone's gallery website, and then I'm on some other artist, and so there's a big ricochet. I mean, at least for me, I find it quite interesting to sort of explore. I don't really use the hashtags that much. I know some people that follow hashtags. Do you? Like the emerging art hashtag, I find difficult to navigate.
I think we follow contemporary painting and some of our own ones as well. Just
personally, I follow my own name, which is
that's useful.
Outrageous. And the Delphian Open Call one.
Okay, that one must be well populated though.
I think it's about 30,000 on there.
That's enough to follow.
Yeah.
And then I also follow just certain accounts. I mean, so there are websites when you can submit your stuff, and there's a jury, and then they sort of feed it through, like, Danny Lamb from Painters Painting Paintings. There's a tongue twister. He often does open calls, which are just, I guess, people email their work, and he'll choose some to feed through to his people, of which there are thousands. And then there's like Floor Magazine, which does open submissions. And I really do pay attention to those places and other people that I just think have great taste. I do. But maybe there's sort of a space for a platform that, allows for, like, gains a reputation for great taste and just post pictures of work. If I see an artist that I'm interested in that Danny Lamb has posted, I feel very confident. But I just really like his style and his things. So, yeah, maybe more of those would be good. Maybe I should start one. I'll be the next Painters Painting Paintings, Sculptors Sculpting Sculptures. There's a gap for that.
So another question that we ask people a lot is, what is one piece of advice you'd give a young artist just starting out? It doesn't have to be one piece, actually, as many as you like.
I would advise them to look a bit into the history of what they're making. Well, my background is in art history, so I guess I'm biased, but I have seen some artworks I've met some artists that are unaware of certain other artists in the past that have not made things similar, but make things engaging with the themes or with the objectives that they're trying to do. And I know some artists might find it daunting or difficult to process that other artists have made or address the themes, but I think if you can look at how things have been addressed and processed in the past, it will allow you to inform the future and how you're addressing those themes now. In general, I think artists should have a good connection with art history. The art schools do that though, but I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of independent research that should be undertaken into, if you decide you want to do ceramics, like look at the history of how that has changed. It's so big now, and maybe think about why it's getting big, sort of asking theoretical questions and sort of probing yourself and being critical about your own work. And on that point, I guess also accepting criticism is a big thing. Yeah. Educating. I think we can never stop learning. I'm always learning. I look back at other things I've done a couple of years ago, and I think I could do them better now, but I guess that's just life, and it's moving and emerging and growing. Educating yourself and looking at other works and going to other museums, not just emerging shows or not just gallery shows. I'm making a pointed effort to definitely see more museum shows, because I find myself going to commercial shows much more now, but getting a good sense of what you're making and how it sits in the general art history.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think
There
that's
we go.
a good place to wrap up then.
Cool.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.